It's a mock draft Monday, and this one starts off with something controversial, perhaps, for Browns fans. We'll talk about it coming up on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast, and proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. Yes, it's another mock draft Monday. Only a few of these left before the big event coming up later this month. And in this one, I am able to bolster the depth in a couple key areas, including on defense, later on in this draft. It starts, though, in the earlier rounds, heavily focused on the offensive side of the ball, including what I think is going to be a controversial decision at number 6 overall by taking Jeremyah Love. And that's where I am starting. Obviously, we work these things first round to the later rounds. And I want to preface this conversation by making it clear, because I think people hear me talk about Jeremyah Love and they think like, oh, this guy's just a buffoon. Why would they take Jeremyah Love? And here's the thing. Jeremyah Love is going to be a fantastic player at the next level in my estimation. He's one of the only players in this group, this class, that's considered a blue chipper. Most experts and analysts have him top 2 in terms of where he sort of falls in terms of the player that he is, the caliber that he brings to the table. He's fantastic. And so if the Browns took him, I would understand it from that standpoint because he is that good of a player. If it was me, I think Jeremyah Love falling feels like it should be a perfect opportunity to trade back, because somebody will talk themselves into, oh, Jeremyah Love and the talent that he brings to the table in our offense, I love the idea of that. Let's go up and get him. I think that could happen. And ultimately, if you're the Browns, we talk about all the needs they have, all the holes they have, especially on the offensive side of the football. Running back is clearly not one of those. That's actually one of the only positions on offense that we feel like at this stage is in a good place for Cleveland. And so I understand where it feels a little outlandish to take a running back at 6 overall. But it has been talked about a lot in recent weeks, and it is something that is plausible that he's there when they're on the clock at 6. And so listen, the whole point of this exercise and doing mock drafts throughout this time of year is to try different things, try different iterations of how this draft could fall, and see how you end up. So I thought here with a couple weeks to go, and these next 2 mocks I do, by the way, are going to be more focused on what in actuality, like 2 different outcomes that I think are like holistically realistic for the Browns in terms of how the draft ultimately shakes out. I'm going to, not that I didn't take these other ones seriously, it was about like sort of experimentation, but these next 2 are going to be, here's where my head is at with how I think the Browns are going to handle this, and some of the players that they could consider or could take, and where I kind of feel things could go. So just keeping that in mind, I don't think the Browns are actually going to take Jeremyah Love at 6 because of needs and everything else. But I wanted to try it for the sake of this mock and see what else I could come away with if I did it. And let's just be honest here. If you added Jeremyah Love to this offense, it's not, to me, again, I would understand it. It wouldn't bother me as much as, a Ty Simpson or some other players would that you could take there. I would understand the thought process of best player available. This guy's an elite talent. He does things somewhat differently than Quinshon Judkins because he's not just this like straightforward power back. He can catch passes out of the backfield. He is a screen god. And so I'd understand from a standpoint of we just need the offense to be better and get more playmakers in it. This is why we pulled the trigger. Why that could make some sense for Cleveland. I'm not advocating for them to do it, but I wanted to see what this thing could potentially look like if they did it, and here's how things kind of shook out. So, yes, as I teased, Jeremyah Love is the pick at 6, just to see how else the board sort of falls. And I'm going to be honest, my biggest disappointment in this draft, in this mock, is how the tackle position sort of shook out for me. And listen, I'll say this, I'm not mad about Max Ihanichor at 35 because I actually really like him as a player, and I would be okay ending up with him as a tackle product for the Browns. I think there's some rawness in his game that's going to have to sort of be ironed out at the next level. So is he as plug and play as somebody that you could get in the first round? Maybe not. But I don't hate that. And I'm going to talk about that obviously a little bit more when we get to the day 2 stuff in the next segment. But I do regret not being able to snag a tackle earlier. But the way that the board fell, I was in a tough spot. And this is why, again, I think it's fun to try these things and see if you take somebody else or if you take this guy or you take that guy, how does the board sort of fall? Francis Maui-Noah went at 3, which I've talked before. I don't necessarily love Francis Maui-Noah at 6 anyway, but I'm just kind of giving you a sense of where all the tackles went. Spencer Fano went at 12. Monroe Freeling went at 14 to the Baltimore Ravens. Then you had, before I was up at 24 at the second pick, Lomu went super early, of course, to the Pittsburgh Steelers because the Steelers would do something like that. And that left me in a spot where, and then Caden Proctor, by the way, went in one spot after Lomu to the Chargers at 22. And so all the top flight tackles that we've talked about as options for the Browns in the first round, whether it be at 6 or 24, were essentially off the board at this point. And then I got up at 24 and I was like, well, shoot, where do I kind of go from here? And I wasn't 100% sure, but I knew that there's a wide receiver in Omar Cooper Jr. who I really like. And so I made the decision to hold off on taking tackle and taking Omar Cooper Jr. instead and addressing that need because at that point it was kind of a best player available situation. And so I snagged Omar Cooper Jr., let the chips fall where they may through the rest of the first round, and then I ended up worrying about tackle as we got into the second round, and I'll talk more about that here coming up in the next segment. But so the first 2 picks in this instance end up being Jeremyah Love, end up being Omar Cooper Jr., and on the surface, I honestly don't hate those 2 picks when you think about just injecting some weaponry into this offense, for whichever quarterback is going to be starting, but especially in the frame of reference in my mind of if Shedeur Sanders is the starting quarterback, you want to get him as many weapons as possible. I just did that for him. I got him more players that can make plays around him and contribute to this group. And so from that standpoint, I don't hate it. But we know, given what some of the needs are, given where the focus honestly has been for the Browns this offseason and trying to fix that offensive line, it is disappointing that I couldn't necessarily address offensive line earlier in the first round or in the first round with how I handled this one, because I thought for sure, my thought process after taking Love, to be honest with you, was, well, hey, when I get to 24, Caden Proctor or somebody's going to be there, and I'll take him, and no one will be the wiser about it, and then we'll worry about wide receiver in the second round, which also might disappoint some people as well. But it was worth at least testing this out, trying this out to see what a potential board would look like if Jeremyah Love was the pick for the Browns. And on the surface, again, don't hate adding more weapons to the offense, but I do not like that I had to wait so long on tackle. And then also, which we'll get to coming up here, trade up in the second round to make sure that I got the tackle that I really wanted in that round, because I felt like I didn't want to let the board fall any more in a way where I wouldn't end up with somebody that I preferred at that spot, knowing how important of a hole it is right now for Cleveland. We'll get to that coming up because, yes, I did finally get tackle. I continued to add to the offense, which was the primary focus really through the first 4 or 5 picks here in this mock. What comes next? We'll talk about it coming up on the Locked On Browns podcast. Workplace chaos, deadline stacking up, inbox overflowing, and that one position you have to fill is still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need to make the right hire, this is a job for Sponsored Jobs. Indeed, Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the right people who actually fit what you're looking for. Skills, experience, location, so you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute that I'll talk to you about Indeed, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates. You check all the boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. And listeners of this show can get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job that premium placement it deserves on Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire. This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. All right, I finally get to addressing the Browns' biggest hole in the offensive line at left tackle by selecting Maxi Honachor. I'll explain that and the ripple effects of it throughout the rest of the second and third rounds as our mock draft Monday rolls on here on the show. Real quick, though, I do want to remind you about the Everydayer Club, your chance to get the show ad-free on any audio platform of your choosing, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast, plus an invite to a members-only Discord channel where you can interact with me, other hosts from around the network, talk some smack across the network, all for just $5 a month. Head to LockedOnBrowns.supercast.com, which is also the link available in the show notes to learn more. So I mentioned his name several times. Maxi Honachor, the tackle out of Arizona State, is my pick at 35, and I did trade up to get him. I made a little bit of an aggressive move up the board to ensure that I got Honachor because I didn't want to lose out on any of the other tackles that were potentially options. I think, if I remember correctly, I can't go back on PFF and find, like, it only gives you, like, the order of how things fell in the first round. But I want to say that Blake Miller was taken early in the second as well in some of those first couple picks. Although maybe not, because I'm only 3 picks in. So maybe Blake Miller would have been there, and that would have been a fine option as well at 39 had I waited. But I didn't want to risk it, and I like Honachor as an early day 2 guy where I decided to be a little bit aggressive. I thought the Titans may be looking to draft him, and so I gave them 39, move up 4 picks, gave them 206 later in the draft, and I snagged Maxi Honachor to solidify or get an answer at that left tackle spot who can play for the Browns and probably would start sooner rather than later. And you just kind of deal with some of the rawness and get him through it. And I do like him a lot. Listen, he is a freak of nature athlete-wise. And like I said, the rawness in his game is something that you hope coaching with somebody like George Warhop can sort of help correct. But I really like what he brings to the table, and I felt the need to be a little aggressive to make sure I got the guy that I really wanted. Then I stay put at 70, the other Browns pick on day 2 of the draft, and I end up coming away with center Sam Hecht. And this is the point in the draft, obviously, where I decided, well, I ignored offensive line early, so I have to go offensive line in that next set of rounds on day 2. And so I put a lot of resources, both resources, frankly, on that day into addressing the offensive line. I am as fascinated as I'm sure others are about what the Browns are doing at center. I thought it was interesting that you had Todd Monken at the owners' meetings last week saying he would like to see, or he'd love to see, if it's possible, Elton Jenkins playing guard rather than center. He didn't say rather than, but he did say he would love to see him play guard. And I think that makes a lot of sense because he's been a 2-time Pro Bowler at guard. And I've talked about him playing guard. Obviously, there's other factors involved here. Maybe or maybe not Joe Bitonio is coming back. If he is, maybe that means he is more of a center. But you also have Tevin Jenkins in there, so what does that mean? I still think center is something that is kind of an ancillary. I don't know if it's an ancillary because that makes it seem like it's on the back burner. It's probably a lesser need now, given what you did this offseason. But still, if you can find a guy, maybe that frees Jenkins up to still play guard instead of center. And obviously, you have Luke Whippler sort of waiting in the wings as well to see what his role is going to sort of look like. And so this became the stage of addressing the offensive line for me in the draft because I didn't do that on day 1 in the first round. I don't hate either of these picks. I've mocked Sam Hecht a number of times. This is maybe the first time, or maybe the first time since early on that I took Honachor and maybe waited on a tackle because I just think offensive line is going to truly be the priority on day 1. And that's the interesting thing here with this. As I think more and more about the Browns' thought process on all this, given what they did this offseason, given Todd Monken's continued comments on how important it is to build through the trenches, he talked last week about how he wants to add a fullback to this roster to be able to do the things they want to do in the run game and be able to effectively run the ball with some of those gap scheme concepts. Well, you need a good offensive line to do those things as well. And so I still think offensive line ends up being sort of priority number one here. But I could be wrong, and maybe they are going to just take Carnell Tate at 6. We'll see. But I again, in the name of trying something different, I did what I did and sort of getting weapons first, including one that maybe is a luxury pick. And that's honestly a good way to describe Jeremyah Love if you're the Browns. Is like he'd be a luxury pick if your team was in a better spot. So I get why people are against it, but because they played out this way, I waited. I still get, I think, a tackle that I feel pretty good about. And honestly, I think Ihanachor is probably one of the last guys tackle-wise that you're like, you feel like has the potential to become he's got some of the highest upside of that class. And I think after him, it's kind of a sharper drop-off. Him and Blake Miller, there's kind of a sharper drop-off in terms of guys that fit what you're looking for if you're trying to find a frontline starter. And so, listen, offensive line is going to be massively important. And so I think ultimately to this team, and so ultimately I think they probably prioritize that better than I did in this draft. And here's a good way to describe it. Because of how I handled the first round in this instance, I think I was kind of playing catch up in the second and third rounds. Like I felt more boxed into, I have to take these guys because I don't want to miss out. And that's obviously not a good place that you want to be drafting from either. And so maybe that's evidence that taking Jeremyah Love doesn't make a lot of sense. Although I also don't know that the Browns are just taking for need, because Andrew Berry continually says like they don't draft that way. So he could take best player available, and it could even be a defensive guy. And then they're still sort of waiting on tackle or whatever, and maybe this is how it will play out as well. But you don't want to be in a place where you feel like you have to take certain guys. Granted, when I took these guys, I don't think the value was off. Ihanachor is considered an early day 2 guy. Heck, where I was at the time, he was like one of the 3 best players available on the board still at that point. So I wasn't mad about that one either. And it just felt right rather than maybe even reaching on a wide receiver like Zachariah Branch, I think might have still been there. But I didn't necessarily want to take him at that point. And Zachariah Branch almost slipped to the 4th round. So there was an opportunity there where I could have maybe even had him the next day. But he just got taken before that. So it's, I felt good about the value of these guys, but I do think I felt a little pressed to, well, hey, because I didn't take any offensive linemen on day 1, now all of a sudden I feel pressed to take them on day 2. And so that's what I made my 2 picks here with Ihanachor trading up to get him at 35, and then Sam, and then obviously I took Sam Hecht at 70, staying put there. That brings us to day 3, and I have yet to address any defensive players or draft any defensive players. That definitely changes on day 3, where I think the Browns have some sneakier needs that aren't being maybe talked about as much throughout this pre-draft process that they need to probably address, and I wouldn't be surprised if they address earlier on in this draft, even though people know how heavy they should be leaning offense. I wouldn't be surprised if safety's on the table. I wouldn't be surprised if corner's on the table. But in this instance, I went heavy offense with the first 4 picks I made, so it's time to work in some defense, some other offensive needs that still need addressed. How do I handle those? Well, I'll show you and tell you coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. The NBA playoffs are here, where every possession matters. Every matchup is magnified, and every game can swing a series. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a great way to get in on the action. Here's what I like about it. You can bet just $5 and get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. The app makes it simple, so simple, to follow the action with player stats, trends, and matchups all in one place. And during the playoffs, the extra insight really matters when it comes to how you want to set up your bets, looking at stars, role players, and key moments. The Cavs right here in Cleveland right now, considered with the 5th best odds and the 2nd best odds in the Eastern Conference to win the NBA Finals. Maybe you're feeling bold. You're going to ride with the Cavs and their dynamic duo, James Harden and Donovan Mitchell, It just makes the entire playoff experience more exciting and engaging when you're doing it with FanDuel. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel, play your game. All right, we moved to day 3 of my latest mock draft. Tried something sort of, I don't know, I think controversial is a good word for it, by starting things off, taking Jeremyah Love. And the way things fell was kind of interesting. Still addressing key needs at valuable picks through the first 3 rounds to this point, but also not maybe getting the top end players when it comes to offensive line, tackle in particular. And now I've left some other holes, I think, on defense that need addressed. Still a few spots on offense that could use some bolstering. And those are the focus for me as I turned to day 3 of the draft. I start right off rip. Round 4, pick 107. The last of those top 5 total picks in the top 110 picks that the Browns have. And I take Dalen Everett out of Georgia, a guy who at that point felt like a best player available situation. He was one of the guys on the board, one of the best corners still left on the board. And I don't know, like he ran a 4.3 at the combine and impressed in that way. So the speed is there. He's also a pretty durable guy in terms of like his physique. He's sturdier than maybe he seems, and he can certainly I think stick his nose in the run game. That's noticeable on tape. And he's not afraid to fly up and make tackles and make those plays when necessary, which is why I kind of viewed him as like, hey, at this stage, reasonable pick in terms of the value, guy that can fill a what I consider at least a bit of a need, because yeah, you have 2 starters who you feel pretty good about, but can he play in the slot to start things off? And can he be physical and stick his nose in on some plays? He's 6'1", so a little bit taller as a corner as well, and that makes you feel like he can maybe do some things, maybe operate out of the slot. Some of the weaker spots in his game are that he if he falls behind on plays despite his speed, he tends to stay behind on plays. And I don't know that he necessarily has matched up with a ton of guys inside that are going to be more physical than him, like tight ends and things like that, because he's been a boundary corner. But again, these guys rotate a lot. They can play different spots, and you're also sort of thinking about the future with this one too, where it's like, can you get a guy who can maybe eventually be that, but play some nickel for you in the meantime? I think it's a fair sort of place to be. It was a fair pick to make. And so I ended up pulling the trigger on Everett here. And then I follow that up back-to-back defensive picks by going with linebacker Aiden Fisher out of Indiana, who I have drafted before on mocks. Not the best coverage guy. That's not his game. He's more of a run-up, make plays in the run game. Very instinctual, though, and has a high football IQ. He just makes plays, but he's physical. He's a good tackler, and I like that about him. And I felt like that was another spot where, okay, you address a couple needs on defense, in corner, linebacker, fill a couple spots in the back ends of this group. I actually think another thing I fell short on in this mock, because I make 2 more picks here the rest of the way, which I'll explain. I think another thing I fell short on in this mock is addressing the defensive line. I think defensive end in particular, especially after missing out on AJ Epinesa and the physical didn't go well, and so they ended up signing him. I think that becomes an instant priority for this team come draft, to find some value and get a guy, even if it's day 3, although it could be even earlier, to help add some rushing ability off, in the trenches, because I think Andrew Berry's always thinking about bolstering that group, even though it's already the deepest group on the team as it currently stands. It doesn't hurt to always add to it, have future bodies that are in there that are young or sort of coming through the ranks. So I think that's a spot that also could be looked at and addressed, but I didn't obviously end up doing that in this current mock. Then at pick 149, I saw an opportunity to add a little bit of draft capital. The Cowboys wanted to trade back with me, or trade up with me, so I took 152 from them. I got pick 152 from them, so they can come up to 149. I also got a 7th rounder next year in 218, which is, ancillary selection, but whatever. And they come up, I forget who they took, but then I waited, and at 152, I doubled up on wide receiver and took Kevin Coleman Jr. This was a classic best player available situation for me. He was I think number one still on the list on the big board, and so I took Kevin Coleman Jr. Even though he's sort of redundant to Omar Cooper Jr., who operated a lot in the slot. The difference is Omar Cooper Jr., I feel good about, can play outside, can move around, can play different areas on offense. Kevin Coleman Jr. is a pure slot corner, purely slot. And so you worry about that overlap a little bit, but I think that Todd Monken can make it work. I also like Kevin Coleman Jr. because, and Shedeur fans should like Kevin Coleman Jr., especially because he does have a history with Shedeur Sanders, having played with him at Jackson State in the early days of his college tenure when Deion Sanders was still there. So an opportunity to kind of reunite him with Shedeur Sanders, get another weapon in this offense, potentially for Shedeur if he's the starter, to be able to throw to who he already has some chemistry with. And then I ended up trading up because there was one thing I hadn't addressed quite yet. A lot of moving and grooving here on day 3 of this draft. I hadn't addressed tight end, which I do think is something the Browns are going into this thing heavily prioritizing, continuing to add to. Yes, you have Harold Fannin Jr. You feel good about that. Yes, you got Jack Stoll to help with the blocking part of the tight end spot that you're kind of losing with David Njoku, obviously stepping away and going somewhere else via free agency at some point. And so I think they are still going to look to add there. And a lot of the tight ends I wanted have been gone. Oscar Delp went, I think, 3rd round. I was hoping to maybe trade up to get him, but I was waiting a little longer, and then he was off the board next thing I knew. Roche from Notre Dame was like all these guys were just getting plucked up, and so I saw an opportunity to move up slightly from 210 from 218 to 210 to take Tanner Koziol out of Houston, who was heavily involved in their offense as a pass catcher. And again, it's a day 3 guy that I feel like Todd Monken can maybe do something with and try some things with and fit into a certain role. And I like that about his game as kind of a pass catching option for the Browns to add another tight end to the mix. And so that's my latest mock. And one of the last ones I'm going to do in terms of like experimenting a little bit here. I tried to do things a little bit differently. Like I said, Jeremyah Love kind of off the beaten path here in terms of a pick the Browns might actually end up making. And again, not one that I necessarily think they're going to make come draft weekend. I don't necessarily think they would go there. I think they would probably look to trade back, especially if he was the guy that was still the best player available there when they're on the clock. But I don't hate it from a standpoint of you're adding more weaponry to the offense. And this is how it all shook out. So you get Jeremyah Love, Omar Cooper Jr., Max Ahanachor for your tackle spot, Sam Hector as the center, Dalen Everett at corner in the 4th, linebacker Aiden Fisher out of Indiana in the 5th, Kevin Coleman Jr. to double up on wide receiver at 152 in the 5th, and then you round things out in the 6th with Tanner Koziol, tight end out of Houston. How do you feel about my latest mock? Do you like it? Do you love it? Do you hate it? You might hate it, and that's okay. I know not a lot of people are going to agree with taking Jeremyah Love at number 6 when you can take other players. By the way, I know people are going to ask, yes, Carnell Tate was gone. Did I read off the top 5? I don't think I did. Carnell Tate was gone because I know there's a lot of Carnell Tate fans out there, which made my decision even more interesting because it kind of was a best player available thing, and you could argue Sonny Styles, who was still there as well. If the Browns go that route, this is an example of how the board can maybe fall for them. Not my favorite mock that I ended up with, but it was fun to try and see how things could shake out if this was the outcome. Let me know your thoughts at Spencito_. You can hit me up in the comments section here at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel as well. Plenty more to come this week, including, philosophically speaking, Andrew Berry is not living in his fears when it comes to how his linemen have worked out in the past. I'm excited to talk about that with you. Don't forget about the Everydayer Club, which is built for you. It's a chance to get the show ad-free, plus access to a members-only Discord channel. Head to LockedOnBrowns.supercast.com to sign up and learn more. Also, keep it local. Check out my friends at Locked On Cavs and Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being an everydayer at the Locked On Podcast Network. I will catch you next time, Cleveland.